I'm Cass, a holistic practitioner and all-around weirdo. Join me as we explore the ultimate final frontier. Welcome to Cosmic Cowboy Roaming the Weird West. Saddle up, y'all. Welcome back to Cosmic Cowboy Roaming the Weird West. I am joined by Doug Batchelor. I'm fangirling a little bit right now. Well, not a little bit, a lot of it.
Don't.
This has been months in the making, and I'm just so excited that it is here. Doug runs What Magic Is. If you're inclined towards magic, you've probably listened to Doug's episodes at least once or heard them mentioned. I found Doug through, I think it was Spirit Box actually. And I listened to one episode and I was like, I need to know everything that this man knows. And so thankfully you have a podcast, so I can do that. And yeah, then I joined the Patreon. I got all the bonus episodes. I got the Discord, and it's just been it's like someone hit the green light on magic for my life, and it's just accelerated exponentially. And Doug is a very magical person, and if you could just give us a little rundown of a brief history of Doug, that would be great.
Oh my goodness! So I'm 40 years old, and I don't feel a day over 39. But I've been practicing magic ritualistically for about 21 years. Yeah. And what happened was I've always been interested in a lot of mystical and paranormal and supernatural phenomenon. I was raised in a place actually not too far away from where you live, called Bragg Creek, Alberta. And I had a pretty magical existence out there. And so at one point in my early 20s, I came across a DVD that was talking about magic and not stage illusionary. And my life was changed because of a DVD called Disinformation, in which a gentleman by the name of Grant Morrison, actually not a gentleman, I'll scratch that. He now goes as they. So they basically were talking about magic and the occult and sigils specifically, and how sigils can alter your reality. These glyphs, if you have a statement of intent in them, then you can change your reality. And I was like, this is interesting. This must be something I should experiment with. And so I did, and I found it worked, and it was pretty crazy. And my life has basically been magical in the sense that I ritually do spells and charms and things of that variety. So yeah, I've been doing that ever since. And in 2019, as a bit of a lark, I started a podcast because, for one, I was working a lot in a job where it would be very intense work for about 8 months of the year, and then for 4 months of the year there wouldn't be a lot of stuff. So I just started a podcast because I have all of this knowledge and this, I guess, just crazy general interest in this thing called magic, and I wanted to share it, and so I did. And there was a bit of prompting from I'm going to say ancestral interactions that I've been doing through magic, and they said you just have to share this stuff, and I did, and it's worked out for me so far. So my podcast is my job. It's what I do. I try to release 2 main podcast episodes every month, and I do 2 full-length episodes for the Patreon every month. And yeah, it's a whole to do. So it's been a lot of fun. COVID kind of derailed my regular day job, and I buckled down and put all my energy into my podcast, and it's been working out so far. So that's basically my very Coles Notes. We say Coles Notes up here in Canada, but I don't know if anybody knows about Coles anywhere outside of Canada, because Coles was a bookstore, was it not?
Yeah, and I don't think it's around anymore. I've always heard Cliff Notes, but yeah, I know Coles Notes as well. But yeah, as you say it, I realize it's probably just a Canadian thing.
Yeah. Because I said it, and somebody emailed me, and they're like, "What are you talking about Coles Notes? Don't you mean Cliff Notes?" I was like, "Oh, wait, we used to go to Market Mall in Calgary to the Coles bookstore there, and right at the very front there'd be these how to read Euripides, and you'd take it down, and you'd have the Coles Notes / Cliff Notes."
Yeah, no, that it makes sense that it's just a Canadian thing, I think, but it's long gone now, I guess. I guess COVID might be a good spot to start because I was having a discussion with a friend the other day about how COVID kind of set off like my magical journey, well, more like my spiritual journey, I should say, and same for them as well. And it sounds like for you also. And I'm just wondering, like in the people that you've talked to, and just in magical workings in general, have you noticed like COVID being kind of inherently magical for some people? I mean, obviously for you, because like it started you on this huge life journey, but or like gave you the space to start the journey, I should say.
I think for a lot of people, particularly within major cities, the lockdowns that occurred, what happened was that you had a lot of people not doing their daily routine anymore, which was wake up, eat breakfast, get in vehicle. And in Canada, it's mostly vehicle based, or sometimes in the bigger cities, they get into a public transport vehicle and they go to work and they stay at work for 8 hours. They come home, they watch Netflix and they go to bed. But the lockdowns really upset that. And it allowed a lot of people to reassess what was truly important in their lives. And while a lot of people were blessed with being able to work from home, they still found that they were getting the work done, but there was free time to think about things. And so what occurred is that a lot of people, whether they realized it or not, work is a community, and they were left without a community, right? They were left without a way of being around other people. And so what we saw was this great migration of people to things like Discord and sharing things on Reddit and on Facebook. And on Facebook was already pretty big as far as magic was concerned, but it got bigger during COVID. Twitter was big, Instagram was big, and so a lot of people started to search for community elsewhere outside of work. And outside of distancing, social distancing thing that occurred, because I think human beings are, whether as much as we can say that we don't require other human beings to operate, we truly do. We're very social creatures. I mean, that is one of those things. Whether or not you think that we're just primates, social structure is very important, and social hierarchy in some way is very important as well. So I think a lot of people, they saw that there was a great upset, and normally in times of great trial and tribulation and fear as well, people begin to search inward. They look inward and they say, well, what can I change and what things can I do differently? And I think that during what also occurs is that, and this is so weird to think of now because things are generally back to normal, is that when there are times of great conflict or strife, I remember that first 2.5 months of COVID when everybody was kind of like, is this going to end humanity? Like, is this one of these things that's going to really exterminate a lot of human beings? When those instances occur worldwide, particularly, and it's been noted by people like Peter Carroll, the soothsayers come out of the woodwork. This kind of spirituality and divination and trying to see certainty in uncertain times occurs. And so we saw a great deal of people become very interested in wanting to take control of their lives when they felt like their lives were spinning out of control. And so a lot of people have kind of gone back. There was this great interest during COVID with magic, and I noticed a lot of people who started magical accounts on Twitter. They've now shut down those accounts, so things are kind of back to normal. But a lot of people, I think, were searching for something bigger, more ultimate in themselves, and magic happened to be one of those avenues. So I've noticed that things have kind of regulated as far as a lot of people that were interested in magic. They've now just kind of like, well, life is enough as it is. Maybe I don't need to add more magic. But yeah, I think that in the chaos and the uncertainty, people wanted to find some kind of way of tethering themselves to something bigger. And so that in a way was really interesting. And I had a lot of people reaching out to me, and saying like, I feel like now for the first time, I need to find something more. And I was like, great, do it. And then I would get emails from the same people like 6 months later, just basically saying, I can't really continue this. And I just say one thing, like, keep that initial spark of curiosity that you had. Even if you don't believe in magic anymore, just try to stay curious. Don't close your mind off to possibilities, because there is great possibility in staying curious. So that's a very long-winded answer to that question, but I think that for myself, it just gave me the opportunity to be like, well, I can do something more with my life. There's this great expression that I use, and I use it quite often, particularly on the Patreon. And again, I just turned 40 years old, but this happened when I started my podcast, is that there's nothing worse than spending your life climbing a ladder only to find out that it's up against the wrong wall. And it's true. Like my life up to that point, I really feel like this is kind of what where my life has been trying to go, was one of interaction and sharing of the things that I find really interesting. I think the world is magical, and my day job was not helping that in any way. It was just a distraction. So the things that were important to me seemed further and further away. And so I just decided, like, it's time to actually just focus on the things that I think are important and that I'm actually good at. And I'm very good at being enthusiastic about the things that I truly love and I find interesting. And so that was, this is and I really hope people don't take this the wrong way. Please don't take this the wrong way, everybody. COVID and the reaction to COVID was a bit of a blessing, just for me to be able to reassess what is truly important. And I hope that there's other people that can actually say that as well. As horrible as it was, and it truly was horrible. Moments of trial and tribulation and confusion provide clarity. And that is a feature. It's not a bug, right? And so, yeah, I found it to be very, very helpful for me to reassess. And I did have, looking back now, I did have a somewhat set future. I could have had, a very good retirement plan. I could have had, I was working for the government, and pay is great. And I was in a beautiful establishment. I was working in a place that, I'd always wanted to work at. I'd always wanted to work in a museum, and I was working in a museum. And it was really wonderful, and things were cushy. Things were cushy, comfortable. It was hard work sometimes, but other times I would be there and I'm like, man, I've got the greatest job on earth. But it wasn't the thing, right? It wasn't the thing that I wanted to do. And 40 years, who knows what our future is going to be, but 40 years is well past halfway point of retirement. So yeah, it just for me, it was like I needed to find out what was important, and COVID was the vector via which I was able to provide that kind of introspection to be able to make hard decisions. And I left that city. I came to a place that was very important to me in the world, a place that my family used to spend about a month every year, and I live here now, and my life is different. It's got its ups and downs, as life certainly does, but none of that would have happened had a major world event not happened.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I find it, just going back to what you'd mentioned about, I think it was Peter Carroll, you said, that was one thing I'd read in, I think it was an anthropological paper or something, that, yeah, during times of upset, like, the return to, like, folk magic is such a huge thing, and that's one thing that I kind of do, like, in my holistic healing business, is, like, ritual is giving you that sense of control. Whether or not it actually gives you the control is irrelevant, because you are actively doing something towards the goal you want, even if there's no physical means to achieve it at this point in time. And yeah, I think for COVID, like, a lot of people spiraled out and did not do well, but then I think a lot of other people realized, like, oh, hey, I can take control of my life and I can do what I want. I don't need a boss looking over my shoulder telling me what to do to be able to make money or live a meaningful life. And it's been interesting just watching the shift in a lot of people around me, that people who before never questioned the status quo are now like, hey, this isn't okay, like, we need to change something. And, a lot of people returning to their roots, kind of thing, like getting in touch with their ancestors, getting in touch with just the earth in general. Like, it makes me giggle thinking back to everybody panicked baking bread at the start of COVID, like that. I feel like that's such a good example of that, exactly, because like you didn't, even if you weren't magically inclined, like that was the way you could take control, was the ritual of like baking. Um
100%.
yeah.
100%. And it's one of those things that I did take up baking, but only last year. But yeah, you are correct. It's just people realized that there's something more, and I think that there was this connection to the things that were, I don't want to say antediluvian, but very ingrained within humanity, and the idea of just creating and fostering, because baking is a very tactile fostering process. It's not just, you put it in a bread machine. People were getting their hands into the dough and getting sticky, and now I used to work in a kitchen. I was a cook for a very long period of time, almost a decade, and I hated, as I took up baking last year, it's like, oh man, this is actually, there's something very restorative about this. It's very human. This idea of, taking, a sourdough starter, or what the British call a mother, and feeding it. Speaking of which, I should probably feed it today. Anyhow, but just, it's taking care of something outside yourself. And it truly is. And yeah, it was interesting. It sucked because I lived in a major city. I lived in the largest city in Canada at the time. And at the beginning of COVID, it's something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Going to the grocery store and seeing everything gone
Yeah.
was crazy. Everything was gone at the biggest grocery store in downtown Toronto. Everything was gone. And there was a long period of time where I couldn't get flour, right? Like people really did panic and just like buy everything. So yeah, it'll be, it's one of those things that nowadays is slowly starting to settle in again. Like, holy smokes, to live in such times that, I do want to have children, but to try and express to them like what occurred, and hopefully that's going to be the last time that will happen, at least in my lifetime. I truly hope so. But we'll see. But it's going to be really hard to express to people who weren't there just what a interesting period of time it was. But it's strange
It was
because
very liminal. Like it was so. It's like
I
that. That's why to me, like it felt like inherently paranormal, like both in like the material realm, but also like for myself, like we didn't have anything to do. Like we live in Calgary, you couldn't go anywhere. So like what my partner and I would do is we would just get in the car and we would drive around,
yeah.
and like the stuff that we would see just in back roads, middle of nowhere, that I've never been. I don't even know where they were, because like we were using Randonautica at the time. I don't know if you know what that was, but it's like a random number generator that sends you to random coordinates, and it's,
Okay.
if you know what
Cool.
psychic questing is, it's like using a random number
Okay.
generator for psychic questing.
Got it.
Um, yeah, and so we found like the weirdest things. Like I know so many people who had really weird paranormal experiences because like everything during COVID was just completely upset, and nothing was routine anymore, and it was like forcing your brain to take note of all these different things. And I think a lot of people really had like very spiritual experiences at that point, because like not only is your routine upset, your mental health is upset. Like people who never had mental health struggles before that I know all of a sudden had to deal with that and like face that and learn how to cope with it. um and it's just, I understand what you're saying when you're like, I hope we never see something like that again, but like I hope nobody gets mad at me for this. Part of me kind of hopes we do in some way, because it upset and it made us realize how much is like wrong with society. And I think people are aware of it now, but like it's getting back to routine fast enough that people are kind of letting it go. But for some of us can't let it go, or can't, just can't put the blinders back on. And I think too, like, I mean, Alberta right now, we're set to have, I don't know if it's the same for BC, but we're set to have like the biggest drought that we've ever seen in this summer. And like just in listening to like astrology and stuff, and like reading on your Discord and stuff, like a lot of people have been saying like, okay, well, with this year, like this year's the time to store water. And like from people that aren't preppers, that have no inclination towards stuff like that I've been listening to their podcasts and stuff, they've even been saying like, oh, I feel like we need to start preparing, like something's coming again. And I'm like, oh, like we already experienced the COVID, we know the signs now. Kind of like people are seeing the the little ripples in the pond kind of thing, and they're getting prepared again. And it's unfortunate because obviously it comes with suffering, but at the same time, I think we need a big shakeup. And I think magic's going to play a part in that. Just from what I've seen and like how people are turning towards being more deeply spiritual, I think it's going to be something that'll be interesting, that if it does get shaken up again like that, how many people return to like a more natural way of living, I guess, and like who disassociate themselves from the systems that are inherently doing us harm. You know, like, yeah, it is great to walk into a superstore and buy all your food, but like how much of that food is produced by Monsanto products? You know, like there's so much that goes along with it, that the convenience is nice, but the reality of it is not so nice. And I think with magic, like, it's sort of, you get out of your routine enough and get out of like the societal routine enough that you can kind of start opening your eyes up to this stuff, which may be like an unintended side effect of magic, but in my opinion, not really, because like the spirits that I work with anyway, like it's not supposed to be this way, and the disconnection between us and them is coming from like the societal systems that we live in, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think if I can jump on that for a second,
Yeah.
I think that what's lovely is that I've been doing magic for about 20 years, but even before that, I always knew that there was, something upsetting about the way that consensus reality is set up. And there's always the joke, like, I don't know why it's consensus. I didn't have a chance to vote on reality these days.
Yeah, sure.
and so that's always been one of those things that I know things are wrong. I don't want to be a doomsday sayer, but there are huge problems with modernity, and I'm going to use modernity in a very broad sense. I think what happened with the large upset was that, yeah, it let people realize that, my goodness, the cracks are stuff that are unsustainable in some way, shape, or form, and there's a lot of loaded ideas that come with the idea of sustainability. But I'm just speaking very, very broadly here again, where yeah, big moments make people realize, oh goodness, things are not great. We have lost touch with a lot of stuff that makes us human. And there's also other groups with vested interests that are telling us things that perhaps we can just look at and be like, that's patently not good for everybody. And so that's why, yes, it's good to see all these people come to magic. But truthfully, to be a magical person, you have to jettison the materialist framework that structures our society, right? And so that's why, we can look at these disruptions and say, like, that's good that more people became interested in magic. But I also say, like, a lot of these people that were like, they were disrupted, they found magic, they've gone back to the old ways, although probably having learned a lesson. I just think that, no big cataclysmic events are needed if one truly gives themselves over to something like magic and the occult and the esoteric. It's like it's patently obvious just how absurd everything is. And always say it jokingly, but it's kind of true, is that the fairies are responsible for just this ridiculous amount of bureaucracy and horrible top-down management of every aspect of daily life. It seems so absurd. Like everything requires so much paperwork to have anything accomplished just to be able to live in this world. How did we get here? So a magical context is always one that just basically these days says, like, yeah, this way that we look at the world as everything being dead matter is not working out for us. So yeah, I don't think one needs a cataclysm to get there, but that's kind of the catch-22 of magic, particularly these days, is because, yeah, in order to take part in it, for the most part, there are people that kind of work around it, that say it's all just like quantum mechanics and stuff we don't understand. And I'm still a materialist, but I think that in order to make magic work for you, you kind of have to get rid of that. And so everything else becomes very obviously, oh, this is a sham. This is absurd and a sham. And what is going on?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it, life experiences alongside of it, and then it's like, okay, like there's got to be something else. Like the one book that I always go back to is The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot,
Mm.
and just reading that, like you can tell, things start to slip a little bit for him. I think Robert Anton Wilson also. Maybe I'm conflating him with another author, but there was another book I read recently that was like that, where they started out being like very like, okay, it's all scientific based, and then like halfway through the book, it's no longer that anymore. Um, and it's just, yeah, I maybe it's just our brains can't compute, but I don't
Well,
know. It,
there's
it just seems like you get into it deep enough, and eventually you kind of go a little bit bonkers, but in a good way.
I hope I'm not getting the story wrong, but one of the reasons that Einstein could not accept quantum mechanics and what was coming out of the Copenhagen interpretation of the more quantum level of physics, small based physics as opposed to big physics, is just that for him, that whole spooky action at a distance thing was just like, if I give currency to this idea, I have moved into the realm of philosophy and spirituality with these physics. And it's like everything I've worked to at this point begins to fall apart. So he literally saw what that trigger would be and could not allow himself to get there. And it's true. For if we look at, a lot of people made a big thing of it 15 years ago, but things like string theory and a lot of big mass physics looked at it and just said that's philosophy / spirituality, basically, right? And so yeah, that's what we have to contend with. Truly, is I don't go to quantum reductions of how magic works. A lot of people will email me talking about it, and I just have to say, like, I can't really talk about it too much. I know a bit about it, but I don't think it's practically useful for my magic working for me personally. But if you need ways for quantum abstraction for your magic to work, cool. But I just see a world filled with spirits and life, and that is more practically useful for me. It's something that has been said, and there's a great podcast called The Emerald.
Yes, yes,
Fantastic.
that's got to be one of my favorite podcasts. It is so
He's,
good.
he's, he's got a great episode where he talks about animism and this idea that everything's alive. And he does make the point, and it's very, very true, is that 0.001% of the human experience says that materialism is the only way that our life and our existence works. 0.001% of the human experience has believed this. For the rest of that human experience, we've basically seen the world as being alive in some way through most cultures. It's not universal, but through most cultures. So I don't know. I don't think that humanity is just on this upward trending graph to get to full objective truth. I still think that there is space for older ideas that, to me, ultimately seem more human and as a way of understanding the world we live in.
Yeah. I think it really speaks to like the human ego as well, and like the ego of like individualistic society nowadays, where we think that we can reach this one pinnacle truth and understand everything, and everything's going to be laid out and cut and dry and like so simplistic, and we'll just understand it, and that's that. And I
Hubris. It's
yeah,
like
hubris, but
it's
like
true. How's it going? Like, how's it going so far, Alberta, with a drought? Like, no, it's sorry, but like, it's just, yeah, it's things are out of whack. I don't understand. I've had so many guests, and particularly for people listening, if you haven't heard my very first episode I did with Jeffrey Kripal, I love Jeff because he speaks from his heart. But I feel privileged that one of the only times I've ever heard Jeff get emotional was on my podcast, because I was asking him about what's going on now, and he says, Doug, we're in an awful spot. And it almost sounds like his voice cracked. He seemed desperate, like something is not right with us right now. Like, it's not going good. We are ending things without even giving us the chance to see while they're ending, right? And so yeah, it's one of those things that it's lamentable, but it's not rectifiable. And by that, I don't mean like we can find solutions to absolutely everything. It's just that we're having a really hard time right now hearing the lessons.
Yeah.
I did a giant live stream with all of my Patreon supporters. All of them didn't join. About 16 people came in, which was great.
It was so sad to miss that. I saw it like an hour or two after that, and I was like, "Oh man, that would have been good. That would have
Yeah,
been so."
it was fun. But my true hope right now, because at the very end we were all like, "What do we wish for 2024?" And I spoke very earnestly. I said, "I hope people listen more, and not just to each other, but to absolutely everything. We are at a point right now where the messages are coming thick and fast, and they're being provided a lot of time by a lot of people who have a lot of money that want you to think certain things all the time. And those are the messages that a lot of people are getting, and they're getting angry about it. But there's other more subtle messages, and I'm not just talking about like spirits and stuff like that. There's things occurring all the time around you that are, although quiet, are still actually sending you some kind of a way of being able to navigate your life and choose and make decisions that are ultimately helpful to not just you, but to everything around you. It's just getting really hard to hear, but they're there, right? They're truly there. I hope that doesn't sound very pseudo mystical, but I truly hope
No,
that
we fully welcome pseudo mysticism here.
it's it's one of those things where I don't want to offer solutions. My podcast is mainly for entertainment, right? And I don't say that, as a way of just saying like, "Give me your money, suckers." But people come to my show for the most part to be entertained and to be educated in a way.
I think it
But
does offer a solution in the sense that it empowers you to find the solutions. Like I was talking to my friend about this recently, that like me getting into your podcast and listening, and just like you don't often say, "Okay, if you want this, go do this ritual." I mean, you don't say that at all, but like, you know, like, "Hey, if you want to get into this, like go check out like Greek magical papyri. Like your Discord recommended the headless rite for me." So, in a period of like deep emotional turmoil, I'm standing in my office with a paper crown on with Hebrew or Greek or something on it, chanting away, and just feeling absolutely absurd. But at the same time, like those methods and the things that I've picked up from your podcast, it empowers you to find the solution. And I wouldn't, like, I always say like, "Oh, I wouldn't be where I am today without like getting weird with a lot of stuff." But like, it really, it can shift your life drastically if you just put the intent into it. And I personally think like magic's what's going to get us through whatever's coming. And like previously, like before I got into all this stuff, I would have panic attacks on the way to work. Like, why am I going to work when there's dying? Like, why am I continuing to go work when like I need to be home, like prepping and like storing food and water and all this different stuff? And now, like, I'll get this like input or message or whatever you want to call it, pack water and store food and learn how to garden and store seeds and all this different stuff. And it's such a, it's soothing in a way. Like I know what's coming, or at least I think I know what's coming. And like I feel these solutions at my fingertips just from being able to put on my little paper crown and do some chanting. But like it is a solution in a way, because it, like I said, like it kind of empowers you to make those decisions and to not need someone to govern you and like lead you. And you can start looking at things from a different perspective and figuring out like, okay, how would I do this? And I think that's probably the biggest benefit I could recommend anyone to practice magic, is just empowering yourself to be your own leader again. And that's one thing that I've noticed in my life, is a lot of the friends that I have that have kind of stuck with the, just went back to normal after post COVID, they don't know how to make decisions for themselves anymore. And that's one thing that like I found very interesting, is like most of the people who I grew up thinking were such good leaders in my family and like, social group, they really don't know. Like they just follow what they're supposed to follow and hope for the best. And it's like people don't really make decisions anymore. And so I think that's where like magic takes a lot of people, is it empowers them to actually make those decisions. And it's been interesting just watching, like you mentioned earlier, one of the authors has transitioned to use they them pronouns. And that's one thing I've also noticed, is like within queer spaces, like the number of queer people who are trending towards, either they get into magic after discovering that they're queer, or they get into magic and then discover that they're queer.
Right.
And like it seems to be a pretty common aspect, but like it's sort of like new territory, I guess. And so like it requires you to be a leader in some way because you have to make these decisions for yourself. And yeah, a lot of it just seems to trend back towards that, is just learning how to be a person again and not just a robot.
Well, what's interesting about any aspect of what we call like the Western esoteric magic tradition, occult tradition, is just that it's not so much that, as fun as the rituals are, for the biggest thing that occurs is that it just allows you to change that word that you used, perspective. It allows you to see something very differently than what you're told. And sometimes that's just enough. Like sometimes just being able to see something very different, different possibilities. For some people that's enough, but it's also scary. It's truly scary.
Well, and that's, I kind of wonder if that isn't why a lot of people didn't turn away from magic too, is like once realizing that you can make these decisions, like that, you know, for some people that would be very terrifying, going from having someone tell them what to do to nobody and trying to do it themselves and then being like, wait, never mind. Like I prefer having someone over me kind of thing.
Well, I don't want this to sound, I don't just want this to sound like it's me being like a school teacher, but sometimes magic just doesn't work. Sometimes for some people, magic just doesn't do the thing that I've been promulgating through my show, and it's tough. And there's a multitude of factors as to why sometimes they don't work, and there's no A to B correlation. Like some people can't come to me and be like, I tried this ritual, why isn't it working, Douglas? And I have to be like, I don't know. You could try this maybe, but I truly don't know. So I think that a lot of times, particularly because of when COVID happened, and just to go back to that kind of the main thing we started talking about is, yeah, I did have a lot of people just being like, Doug, I don't think magic works. I don't think magic's real. I don't think magic works. I tried rituals. It didn't really do anything. I'm going back to just, my life is enough as it is. And so I think that's it. I don't know a lot of people who have seen the efficacy of magic then just be like, this is too much power. This is too much responsibility. I don't see that too much.
Yeah.
But even still, even if that was the case, I don't get a lot of people talking to me about it. For the most part, I get people basically just being like, it didn't work for me. It doesn't work for me. It seemingly doesn't work. And so I don't believe in it. My life is, I'm struggling to get through as much as it is with the reality that's been handed to me. I don't think I can onboard anything else. And I just say, yeah, stay curious. Just stay curious, because if it affords you a different perspective, even a little bit further up down the line, then that's good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think like if you didn't grow up like in some sort of like religious background, like coming into magic, and not, for me, like I was religious when I was younger, and like having faith in something that I didn't see a lot of product from was very normal for me. So for magic, it's just like it's just fun to believe in things for me. Like that's just my hobby, is like trying out different beliefs and having fun with it. And then I find just like approaching things from an open perspective without expecting real results sometimes gets you like the weirdest things. Like there
Yeah.
was just a brief like tangent. I was walking one time. This was just after signing a lease for a car. We were in a different place in the city that we haven't really been before. We were walking because we didn't have a car, and there was this fairy ring on the ground, and like everything felt very liminal. And my partner and I were talking about it, and then I see the fairy ring, and like before I even realized what it was, I was already in the center of it. And I like looked at my partner and I'm like, oh shit, like something's gonna happen. And like it was just kind of a joking thing, not that I actually like personally didn't really believe in like, this mushroom ring is gonna do something to me. And then yeah, sitting at home, and I had like it was the weirdest. I saw a moth come into my yard, and it flew up and it flew right in front of my face, and I was just staring at it and watching it. And the way that the light was hitting, the wings looked to slow down, and it looked like a little person in between the wings. But when the wings beat again, then it was just a butterfly, and it was flipping back and forth between a butterfly and a fairy type thing. And I was just sitting there giggling, and I was like, this is, for me, like a lot of magic is just like the possibility of something. Like it's not necessarily going to happen, but it's a possibility of it. And when I noticed the fairy ring, and I'm like, oh, the possibility of fairies being real, like that's hilarious to me. But like I don't really believe either way. And then I'm sitting in my backyard and I see this, and it's both possibilities at the same time, and I'm just sitting there like, this is too much. Not enough at the same time, because I can't make a decision on this. And yeah, with magic, I think like at least for me, like when I approach it with like this is going to work, this is what's going to happen, this is 100% this, it doesn't work. And same thing if I go into it being like, well, this is not going to work. But if I'm just like, oh, like whatever happens, happens, and allowing both possibilities, which like I don't think our society is very much set up for that mindset. Like,
no, we live in a very either or as opposed to and both.
yeah,
Like that's very um, pertinent to a lot of what I talk about on my podcast. There's a great book called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, and he basically talks about brain hemispherics and how one side of the brain is, for the most part, basically taking over every aspect of our lives, which is the left hemisphere of the brain, which is kind of like it likes to take things apart, and it likes the order of things. It's not very holistic. And then there's the right hemisphere of the brain, which sees everything as being connected, and it's a really wonderful side of the brain. But right now we're privileging that left hemispheric part of ourselves that really just wants abstraction and distance between stuff. But it's true that one of the exercises of magic is just being open to possibilities. That's a very right brain perspective, truly. So yeah, instead of either or, it's and both, right? So it's very important, and you're doing magic truly just by being open to anything happening.
yeah, definitely. Okay, I have a couple little notes of like topics I wanted to touch on. One of the questions a friend wanted me to ask you was in terms like, do you practice Egyptian magic, and right?
Well, I mean, we could call it Egyptian. It's more Greco-Egyptian, which is kind of from the period of time after Alexander the Great came through Egypt, and the magic that kind of sprouted up in and around Egypt from 323 BC to about 400 AD. We have these things called the Greek magical papyri, which are a combination of Greek and Egyptian and Demotic, which is an Egyptian language. Egyptian alphabet. I slap on the wrist for that, but it's so yeah. I do. I less so these days, but yeah, I've done the dabble in what can be called Greco-Egyptian or Hellenistic Egypt magic.
Yeah, we were having a discussion about it the other day. Like, I tend to focus more on like Celtic Reconstructionism type stuff. And my friend and I were discussing it in terms of like practicing magic in Canada, obviously, because neither of us are Indigenous. And so I was just curious, like for yourself, how have you been able to reconcile like cultural differences, or like do you find like how to word this? Like, are you still able to connect with like the spirits of the land and stuff through like a non-indigenous system like that? Like, how do you find that sort of interplays?
Well, I just released a new episode on my Patreon last month called the unnecessary suffering of the armchair magician, in which I was talking about how I came from the city to move to an area that seems like a very fresh wound of colonialism here, which is Vancouver Island. And the episode is literally just me talking about how my magic has had to change. What was interesting to me, dwell on it too much, but right now I've just kind of been in a process of seeing that the old way in which I operated when I lived in Toronto is not going to cut mustard here. So I've been kind of like seeking out and searching out ways of, how I like to put it, find my fairy faith. But I'm trying to figure out how best to onboard a very active magical ecosystem here on Vancouver Island into my personal magic, and it's a process that's taking quite a bit of time. But to go back to the question that you asked, is that I found with Greco-Egyptian magic, it's very city based. And what's interesting is that these papyri, or these scrolls from which these rituals that were written, because I'm doing magic that we have evidence of. The reason we have them translated, I'm not just going and being like, oh, I like Anubis because he's got a wolf or a jackal for a head, so I'm just going to do some shit and then maybe it'll work. We have actual historical Indiana Jones shit scrolls in which these rituals are written. And it's like, oh, let's give that a try. That seems very interesting. That's very cool. But what is very interesting about these artifacts is that they allow you to have a bit more context of the place in which they came up. And what we find is that from that period of time that I mentioned where these scrolls come from, in places like Alexandria and Thebes in Egypt, is that they were very synchronistic. There's the language used in them, there's Jewish gods, there's sub-Babylonian stuff, there's Egyptian, there's Greek. And so what I have noticed is that this magic worked for me when I was living in a city, because cities these days, particularly Toronto, is very syncretic as far as like how it's very multicultural. So one of the reasons that I think maybe that magic was working for me was that I was living in a place where that kind of multicultural syncretism was hearkening back to in places like Alexandria. I think 1/4 of the population at a time, don't quote me on this, but 1/4 of the population of Alexandria for a large segment of time was Jewish. Like it's so weird to pick up these scrolls or read the translations of them and see that Adonai gets listed with Anubis, just to use an entity that I just brought up, or a god that I just brought up. So it's very bizarre to me, but it seemed right when I lived in a city that, oh, this is city magic. Like it's very much about the fact that cities are built upon destruction and turmoil, but also people just trying to make it through life and adopting ideas and the pragmatism of what worked magically. So I found that that's when that magic was very effective. But here, when I came to a different place, a fairly, I'm going to say, young from the perspective of European settlers and colonizers coming here, that it just is like there's something else very not European here, and it seems very fresh and it seems very new. So my process is these days is that I can't say that I've reconciled anything at this point. Am I trying to? I don't really know what I'm trying to do right now, but I noticed that there's some stuff here that I can't do. It doesn't feel good to do that I used to do when I lived in Edmonton or Toronto. That just has to be put on the back burner for a little bit. So my Egyptian, Greco-Egyptian stuff is kind of put aside for the time being, as well as a lot of Solomonic and Grimoire-based magic, just because I don't think I can do it quite yet. Something else needs to happen with me being able to be okay with where I am right now. But as far as like when I lived in Toronto, and yes, Toronto is on territory that belonged to the Anishinaabe people before Europeans got there, but it also just has this meat grinder, like it's a giant scar of spiritualities, all just vying, and that it's a bit of, cities are a bit of a wonder in that sense, in that it's a lot of groups of people that don't understand each other but just try to work together, which is beautiful in some senses and also terrifying and in a way. So that's why I think that a lot of that Egyptian stuff, the Greco-Egyptian stuff, worked, because those Egyptian places from which where these scrolls came up were very much that. They were very much, it wasn't just the Greeks, the Greek gods, because Alexander came through, believed in everything, and they're the most important. You have Apophis, and you have all of these other deities listed in the same rituals. So it's a very interesting perspective, but a very interesting thing to notice. But what's great about that stuff, again, is that context, although not in the scrolls itself, you have to do that research. So where I am now, I'm doing a bit of research as to what is going on here. It's very different stuff. But yeah, I wouldn't say that my active job has been to reconcile what's right within myself to make my magic work, so I can go back to doing the Greco-Egyptian stuff. But it's just like I'm making space for a very turbulent spiritual ecosystem that is like, you come here and you feel it. It's like, oh my goodness, it's a lot of pain. It's a lot of promises broken, of hurt, and it's not just European on First Nations people. It's Europeans on Europeans for a period of time during World War I. They locked up anybody who sounded German, which was mainly Ukrainian people. They built an internment camp, and where I live right now is literally where those people would have been. People starving for 4 years during World War I. Within the place that I live. Like that's, I know I make a big, it's messed up. That makes, I make a big deal out of it. And perhaps I'm not giving enough space to the horror that was inflicted on the First Nations community here in the place that I live. But it's just a realization that there's a lot of pain here. There's a lot of suffering here. And there's a lot of stuff that's just, it's not good. And seeing how my spirituality and my magic fits in here, if indeed it fits in here, and what has to change has been an ongoing process.
So how have you adapted your magical practice then? Like if you've set aside the Greco-Egyptian stuff, like what are you working with now?
So for the most part, as I say, I'm finding my fairy faith, and by that I mean I'm just trying to suss out what kind of strange effects I can get by merely just being out on areas in which the places are human. They're what we would consider like nature or human adjacent. And so for the most part, I'm doing a lot of offerings of things that that are in some ways, yes, it's just kind of like, what do you give spirits of the area that you are? You kind of give them offerings of gifts of things that are things that the people before came here. So I don't want this to sound like I'm doing some kind of cultural appropriation, but it's just like gifts of berries, gifts of seeds, and things of this variety. And so a lot of it is offering based. But I've been setting up these small little I'm not going to call them spirit houses, but they're just little offering sites. And sometimes I do them and I set them up and I get very clear messages that, take this down somewhere else, please. So a lot of my magic personally these days has just been going to these spots and just trying to be like, is there anything happening here? Is this something that is viable? Is there some way that I can just get some kind of a signal that says it's okay to be able to be here, to be able to practice what you want to practice here? So it's literally just, I don't know the best way of putting it. It's making sure that I'm okay. Sorry, it's making sure to see if the place where I am is okay with me being able to do other kinds of things here. But what's interesting is that because of the circumstances in which the area that I am, it was on territory in which the First Nations community basically said, like, to the Europeans, we can share. And then the Europeans said, share, great, we're going to take it all. So you do have what's also here is that it's been over 200 years of very obvious European spirituality and things like fairies and stuff like that. And there's gnome houses. People put up gnome houses here. And while there might be a glibness to it, I find that those are the areas in which I get a bit more traction as far as putting stuff out, as far as offerings are concerned. But that's mainly it. The reason I did that armchair magic episode is that my magic is mainly just about, these days, just ancestor stuff. Always something that I do. More meditation, just trying to slow down things, but also just these walks in which I'm going to places and just trying to get to a state where liminality, and that's a word you used earlier, liminality and the potential for possibility is not an abstract concept that I need to do spells and rituals to get to, but an active way of life. And I know that sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo for people, but it's just, I feel now, and for 2 days in a row, I've gone to this certain spot. My mind or consciousness or whatever you want to call it, it is actively now starting to change when I go to these places. I get into a very different state of mind in which my mind quiets down and things are starting to happen that are open to those possibilities. But I'm just not going to like charge in there and start putting up Solomonic circles in the middle of the woods and stuff like that, and burning incense that comes from the Middle East here, right? Like it just doesn't seem appropriate right now. So right now, my magic has just been seeking to try and find a space within a very overly active ecosystem that is seemingly in turmoil, and it just feels like it. Like you come to where I live. I'm not going to mention which city I live in. It's about 100,000 people, but it's not good. The issues here are, I'm going to say, very patently because of the circumstances of colonization and the fact that all of the horrible things that happened here, they do have purchase and currency for everything that will occur here afterwards. So very long-winded answer, but my magic right now is basically armchair magic for the most part, with hiking and just going to these places and offerings of that sort, and just kind of not waiting for one signal, but just kind of waiting for, can I go back to doing some of that other kind of magic? If not, how does my magic need to change? There's been some strange stuff that's happened here. Nothing mind-blowing.
It sounds almost like a little bit more personable.
Yeah,
Like
it is.
in what I've been reading about like the Greek magical papyri and like your episodes on it and stuff like that sounds so much more of a like a strict framework within which to operate. Like the metaphor that you used of like it being more appropriate for cities, like that makes, I don't know how to further define it beyond that, but like it sounds so detached from the land that's on and more attached to like the turbulence of the city itself.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what you're describing sounds so much more like you're building like a personal relationship. And I don't know if that is the case, like if you felt that you had more of like a personal relationship with whatever you were working with in Toronto. But like this sounds so much more intimate, I guess is the best way to say it. Like it's very like intimate with like the genus loci of the area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, genus loci is an interesting way of putting it. Yeah, it's I just joke, but it's kind of true, is that my ancestors in Western Europe, I'm Scots Irish ancestry with a lot of English in there as well. But for a period of time, they operated with they were Christian, but there was this other thing, and that was what we can now look back at, and other scholars, people such as Emma Wilby, other people like Francis Young have brought, and Simon Young have also brought this, is that there was a true way of operating within the world, particularly rurally, in which superstition and belief played a part. And we're calling this the fairy faith, for lack of a better term. We're calling this the fairy faith. But this was the way that my ancestors truly operated on the land that they were putting out offer. Like if they put a rake into, or sorry, a shovel into the ground for a place to build something, if that rake fell over, it was very obviously the fairies that did it. Don't build there. So that was how they operated. Like, and so there was truly a rights relations that was occurring with the land itself, and this happened for hundreds of years, right? So in a way, what I'm doing is it's harkening back to that in some way. So when I say, I'm trying to find my fairy faith, it is truly like part of that. I don't feel it's atavistic in the sense that it's just like I'm bringing all of I'm not putting milk out or stuff like that. Like there used to be this thing where there would be milk left out and for the fairies and stuff like that. But I'm just giving other offerings. I'm just sussing out what's going on here. Is the best way of putting it. So yeah, I joke I'm finding my fairy faith, but it's something very palpable here, and I'm just trying to see how I hate to use a technological metaphor, but it's seeing where I can plug in, like where my magic and my personal practice can plug into something that's very obviously here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like, especially if you are working with your ancestors, like people who are, especially for me, like, because like a lot of my family's Irish, it seems to be like Scottish, Irish, like those specific ancestral heritages, we tend towards that anyway. Like it just seems like we we all kind of have this distant sense of like some sort of faithful kind of connection. And a lot of the people that I know who their ancestors are from those locations, eventually they kind of get around to coming back to that sort of thing. And like being in Alberta, like that's one thing that I've been kind of considering, because like obviously Calgary is like a much younger, less densely populated city than Toronto. and trying to like tap into the spirits of the place here is really interesting because you get a sense of them. Like one place for me is Nose Hill. Like I don't know how much you
Mm.
ever went up on Nose Hill,
Oh
but
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
that place is there's some stuff up there.
Mhm.
And like in my work, like I travel a lot to central Alberta, and I don't know how much you've been up in like Wetaskiwin area, but like it is palpable up there.
Mhm.
And like the number of paranormal stories that I've heard from clients, like weird paranormal stories, like stuff that I've never heard anywhere else. And it seems to be like Western Canada in general. I'm perhaps just because the population's less dense, like colonialism has had less time here kind of thing, like whereas Eastern Canada, like they had what, an extra 100 years of
At
settlement on
least, yeah,
top of,
yeah.
yeah. And it just like it feels a little bit more like wild here, I guess is the best way to put
Mm.
it. Like the vibe that I sort of get, especially in like central Alberta or like northern Alberta. Oh my, northern Alberta is weird. Like I went to,
Yeah.
oh, what is it, Cold Lake or something like that, and
Right.
that was
Yeah.
like, yeah, that was, I didn't like it, honestly. Like it was a little too it was a
Yeah.
little too much. But it really gives me the sense, like when I did travel to Ireland at one point, uh the sense of presence is very similar. Like
Right.
that there is some sort of land speed, like you're all, something is watching you at all points in time when you're
Mhm.
out and about. And I don't know, like if people from like Scotland, Ireland, those sorts of areas are like naturally more attuned or something like that, but like people I know of those heritages, like they tend to pick up that sort of like land spirit inhabitation out and about, like outside of the city especially. And
Yeah.
it's just, I don't know if like ancestral heritage really like precludes you to more magical inclinations or not, but it definitely seems that way in my life, at least for the people that I know.
Yeah, for I can speak specifically for myself. The Scottish side was from very rural Scotland, and the ones that came to Canada, they were all farmers, right? Like they didn't live in cities; they had farms, and so I know for a fact that some of the stuff that they did was very much bringing the Scottish rural ways, and that stuff had tenure, and it's stuff that my family wouldn't really talk about. But oh yeah, there were horseshoes above every entrance. There the Irish ancestors, they would have St. Bridget's Cross, and like this was an active way of engaging with the world. And so it's not that I want to do that stuff here, because it just doesn't. It seems like that stuff is very um, locked in time to that specific way of being, and but it's not the whatness of what my ancestors did that interests me. It's the how. It's truly the how they engaged is the most interesting part. And that's always, I don't want to big up my podcast again, but that's one of the things that I try for the most part, even though the title of my show is What Magic Is This? It should be How Magic Is This? But because I try people to say like the whatness of magical practice itself is not the most important part, because we come from it from a mechanical aspect of trying to see like how do these spells work. People want the A plus B equals C stuff, and I'm trying to get people away from that kind of calculative way of doing magic. Just be like, look at magic and how different forms of magic are practiced, and that's the more important part, and try and see if you're learning lessons as to how specifically people in this area, within the context and within the spiritual ecosystem. And I say that a lot, but it is true. I do view everything as being ecosystemic, is that as long as you're able to look at that and see how it was expressed, that's more important than doing, you know, this is what people did in Pennsylvania that were doing that were Dutch, and if you do this anywhere in the world, it'll do the thing that you want it to do. It's like, no, that worked specifically for that area because of the spiritual ecosystem from which it came. Like that's the people there, the land there, everything. Look at the how of it. That's the most important part, and that becomes a puzzle for you to be able to to say, well, what can I do here where I am, given the contexts of where I am, my ancestry, the spiritualities that were here before me. What can I do with this? That's the more important part. So I've always tried to hone in on the howness of stuff as opposed to the whatness. I don't think despite the fact that every book that's sold on magic, and there's tons of them behind me, has that whole transactive way of doing magic. Truly, just try stuff. Like, as much as I say, like, you don't need, as much as I say to try and understand the context of where you are is very important. Also, just doing stuff and seeing what sticks is good as well. Right? I'm all for trying Greco-Egyptian stuff in the middle of, I don't know, the Northwest Territories. Try and see what happens, right? But also, like,
If you
there
get
might be
smoked
other,
down, it's not your fault, right?
right, yeah. There might be other ways of operating. So I'm a little less, as I get on in age, I'm a little less gung ho about what I do, because I used to just try everything and see what would work, and some things worked, some things didn't. But these days, I'm a bit more okay with uh, the fact that I don't want to go out to have things happen with magic. I'd like to see magic come to me again, which was seemingly how I operated and I hope I'm not looking back with rose-colored glasses, was just seemingly how I was when I was most magical, which was like the age of like 8 to 12 was very magical time for me. Again, I said that liminality and the potential of creativity and imagination, which I don't think imagination is made up. I think there is truly this interaction that occurs when you give in to living with imagination as a true virtue, where it's not an abstract concept, where it's just a state and a way of being. And that's truly been my goal. And the way that I've been trying to do it recently, again, is just it's finding my fairy faith, because it's here, and I know it's here, and I'm not seeking it. I want it to seek me. That's truly it. Is that I want it to come to me on its term.
Have you had a chance at all to connect with like Indigenous knowledge keepers and discuss anything with them?
At this point, I haven't. There was a period of time where there was a course that I was supposed to take, but I was out of the city when I was supposed to do it. But I've been reading a lot. I've been reading a lot about specific. I won't name the specific tribe just because it would give away my location, and not that it's a big deal. There's literally two big cities on Vancouver Island, so it's one of them.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I've just been reading a lot. I know it's terrible to say, because most of the culture is it's oral traditions for the most part. But I've been doing a bit of reading. It is one of those things that I have to entertain for sure.
I think it's intimidating oftentimes, like being like a white person in this land, that like you don't want to overstep, but at the same time, like for myself anyway, like there's a very deep. I know that I have to come to that eventually and like reach out to knowledge keepers and like learn that aspect of practice, because like that partly because like I feel like I have to do that, but also because I want to. Like it's not like this sense of obligation. Just in like working, I have like a handful of Indigenous clients, and a lot of things that like we're told, like saging for instance, that we're told is like a closed practice, it's not. And like the Indigenous client that I was speaking to, like her dad was a medicine man, and she said like he was a huge proponent that everyone needs to learn how to sage themselves, and white people could really use it because like we don't sage ourselves enough.
Yeah.
And a lot of those practices, like when you're approaching it out of respect and wanting to honor the land in the appropriate way, like it's a open practice in certain aspects, whereas like, you know, yeah, there are certain aspects that are specifically closed, and not just to white people, but closed like within family lines and stuff like that. But I think there's a very big potential for like magic to kind of spearhead reconciliation in that sense. That is an area that we can connect on. Like obviously, like we're already working with the spirits of the land, you're already feeling them, you're already sensing them. It's not like they're telling you, sorry, no, like you're white, it's closed, go away. And I think
Not yet, at least.
not yet, yeah. I think that's a very exciting possibility just in terms of reconciliation, is like being able to connect on that level with people and explore that aspect of it, because it's something that I don't think is really acknowledged, and it's kind of pushed aside in a lot of areas.
Yeah, I don't want people to get the wrong idea, though, is that it's not, I'm not out there to co-opt what has existed here for spiritualities before and for spiritualities that have been here for hundreds of thousands of years. Like truly, there are aspects of it that I want to look at to see exactly, like, again, to go back to that idea of how the people who were here before interacted and how that fits in with what I'm accomplishing and what I want to do, and whether or not it's tenable in some way. It is one of those things I wish I could get a wider understanding, but for the most part, I'm reading about it, and I'm looking into a lot of the we call it mythology, and I hate the fact that we have to call it mythology because for a good example, less so much for the place where I'm living, but more so for across the water. There's this idea of Sasquatch. Sasquatch, right? Bigfoot, right? There are First Nations communities on the lower mainland, or not the lower mainland, a little bit further up, that Sasquatch is an ancestor. It's not a mythical being. The Sasquatch is real. And I'm not saying like real in the sense you're going to go and take a photograph of it, although perhaps you can, but just that it's not a bit of mythology for them. It is an active, tenable, spiritual presence that is an ancestor for these people, right? And so when I'm reading up about, I just hate the fact that I have to go, like, I have to call it mythology, but these books are for the most part, they have to have a title on them. So it's always like Coast Salish mythology and stuff like that. And I'm just like, right. I guess I have to, but reading up about the entities and the beings and the way in which it was practiced, I think it's helping. It certainly is helping in some sense. And I'm not saying this to try and like deflect as like I get a free pass by not going and speaking to cultural elders here. You are entirely correct. There are people here that don't want to talk to me about this kind of stuff. For that same reason that, I just call it mythology, right? They're going to assume that that's immediately what I'm going to do. For good reasons, right? But it's one of those things where I would like for it to happen a little bit more. For now, it feels I'm doing okay just by reading about certain books, and there's things online as well. But truly, to get to it, and it's one of those things where I haven't lamented that I haven't done it, but it's just that it is a bit intimidating because the damage done is brutal.
You don't want to perpetuate that in any way.
The spiritual damage done is incalculable, right? I bring this idea up in my episode about armchair magicians, but it is worth saying, specifically for the area that I live. Again, the First Nations Indigenous communities here said, "Come, we can share." And the Europeans said, "Great, it's all ours. Tell us a little bit about, your spirituality." And I'm speaking specifically of the First Nations group on this where I currently live. They held many things sacred, but the two biggest things that they held the most sacred, one was there's this island, and there's rocks on the shore of this island, stones that are beautiful. They're gorgeous, beautiful. But those rocks are their ancestors. That's the spirits of the departed elders and the people that are no longer currently walking on this earth, on this planet. That's how they are manifested. And then also what they hold sacred to be is the giant trees that exist here on this island. They're very sacred. What did the Europeans immediately start doing? We take those rocks, we blow them up, we put them on ships, and we send them all the way down the west coast of Canada and the US to build banks, and we chop down all of their biggest trees. The two of the most sacred things to the people specifically on the area that I am. That's what occurred. So that's when I talk about there's ecological damage, sure, but the spiritual damage of watching your ancestors be slowly chipped at, blown up with dynamite, put on boats, and made to be put into centers of commerce to look pretty, so far away from where they originally were, that's spiritual damage, right?
It's basic warfare on the spiritual aspect. I tend towards conspiracy in this aspect, that I do believe that the powers that be actively engage in magic as like a way to achieve their means, and like that just that's so clearly an element of that. It's sort of like magical warfare, and it just like, as you're saying that, like my heart's just like hurting. Like I don't know a lot about BC history at all, and I had no idea that that was what occurred.
That's
And
very
it's
regional. Again, I'm being very specific about
yeah,
literally the place. Everything I've talked about is within a 10-kilometer radius, right? Like that's it.
but that's a lot to have like just on that land, like for the people themselves, obviously, but like the land itself too, because like looking from like an animist perspective, like that's a huge amount of like spiritual death too, like just
Yeah.
a lot.
It's damage. It truly is damage. There's no other way to cut it. If you'll excuse the pun, truly. But it's one of those things where right now I'm okay with somewhat just silent learning about this area. What's cool is that some of it's coming back. The governments or the powers that be within BC are starting to now give back the names, the proper names. They're putting up plaques. They're putting up just to allow for a bit more understanding. And yeah, most people that go to these places don't read the plaques. I do. I think they're somewhat important because I will write down names of things, and so that allows me to actively go and research for myself what's going on, even just as a starting point, right? But yeah, I'm okay with that for right now. I think that eventually I do have to get a bit more understanding, particularly for people living here. Now, what has happened though, and I know this for, it's not everybody here, but a lot of First Nations communities here they're actively Christian as well. It's not that they were forced to be Christian. A lot of them became Christian. The opposite happened, obviously, a lot as well. So that's an interesting part of the story that I'd also like to investigate. Not merely because it interests me, because I'm fascinated by saints and stuff like that, but it is another part of the story, right? And so I will have to do that at some point. But for now, I'm literally trying to learn about that 10-kilometer radius. Like there's enough reading there, and it's tough to find the information. It's not simple, but also I have my podcast. It's my podcast literally takes up 70 hours every week, right? Like I work on it a lot, so it's tough. All of this is to just say it's kind of I've kind of like turned down the dial on certain more flashy aspects of my magic. My
Yeah.
magic is a bit more gentle these days, a bit more
Well, and I
listening.
mean, with what you were saying of like hoping that it finds you,
Yeah.
as we're talking about this, and this was for myself, was like I never expected to have an Indigenous client, and one that asked me to clear a curse, and I was sitting there like, don't you have medicine people like in your culture that specifically, like I don't feel advanced enough. Like you have a whole group of people who have been culturally trained for generations. And like it found me in that aspect where it was like, oh, okay, like this is something I need to delve into more. And I mean, for yourself, like, who knows, you might encounter when you're out walking around and trying to learn more. Like it's I appreciate that aspect of like sometimes it just isn't the right time. Like even if that is something you want to learn, like maybe that will come to you at a time, and that element of magic will find you at the right.
I did come here, and there was some stuff where I was starting to do kind of old ways of operating, which was like saints and my necromancy and stuff like that. And I just got here, and it is like this did not feel like the right time or place to be doing this. Like, so I don't want to say I came in guns blazing, but it was just like, oh yeah, that other stuff will still be fine. And then it just did not feel good. It's just like that. This really feels like a Sisyphusian task of like pushing a rock uphill. It's not like it's not going anywhere. Something's different here. Something is truly different here. And so yeah, when I did a series of episodes on fairies, it just kind of like that kind of was a bit of like, oh, so this is understanding what my ancestors did was interesting. So that's probably something that I have to look into a little bit more. Like there's a reason that this is very fascinating to me right now, not only for the podcast, but for myself. So I was like, okay, so this looks like a marker as far as a place for I should investigate. And yeah, it's been interesting. It's been a bit of a trip. I'm not putting a timeline on it. Like,
Yeah.
By March of 2024, I want something to be very clear. No, it's just it's for one, I don't have a ton of energy for it just because it's all going into the podcast.
Mhm.
But I sit with my ancestors. They're literally right behind me, and then the kind of offering stuff that I do, that seems to be enough for now.
Mhm. Yeah. No, that's good. I guess we're coming to about an hour and a half. Is there anything else you want to touch on?
No, we've gotten to some interesting places. I don't think I've ever talked about this kind of stuff with anybody else before, so it's
Yeah,
been fun.
no,
Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, no, I guess I tried, some of the Greek magical papyri stuff, and it's interesting to hear you say that like it felt good in the city, but not further west, because that's kind of how I felt. Like, the headless rite, like it was interesting for me to do because I've never done something so formalized like that.
Mhm.
But while I was doing it, like I had the sense like it's not going to connect here like it
Right,
should.
right.
But then, like wandering around in the woods and like putting out offerings and stuff like that, and like just speaking to the spirits of whatever place I'm in, that feels a lot better. And so like part of me has wondered like, oh, maybe I'm just not like this like formalized structured type person. Like maybe it is a little bit more everything is very seats of pants for me. Like
Yeah.
there's no plan. Everything is just whatever happens. And it's interesting to hear like that same experience for you coming back out west. Did you find like when you were younger and in like Bragg Creek, like was the magic style? Were you more into the Greco-Egyptian? Like, did you find that resonated
So I
more? Or
didn't start.
kind of,
I didn't start doing magic until I lived in my parents separated, and I went to live with my mother in Calgary, and that's kind of where my magic kind of first started, was in Calgary. But for the most part, it didn't really kick into overdrive until I moved up to Edmonton. I lived in Edmonton for about 10 years. So I wasn't in Bragg Creek doing what I can call formal ritual based magic, but I still say like my magical understandings, in retrospect, and again, I don't think I'm looking back with rose colored glasses, but I lived a magical existence from between the age of like 7 and 12. My life was very magical. I was always outside, and I was always doing things, and I was creating what we could call like offering sites. I was building stuff out of like wood and like I had an experience that I'm pretty sure was some kind of a fairy experience. It was very bizarre. I was like, I thought I was feeding a goblin. I'm just going to say, like, as a kid, like I think I was like 9 years old. I thought I was feeding a goblin. It could have been like a stoat or something like it, or a pine marten or something like that. But that's kind of what my ambition has been over the last little while. And if there's like a silent ambition, is to get back to that state where it was just like magic wasn't abstract. I didn't have to do spells to get stuff to happen. It seemed like it was always there in front of me. And but as far as like the Greco-Egyptian stuff, that truly didn't start until I was in either Calgary or no, actually that didn't start until I was in Toronto. Truly, the Greco-Egyptian stuff. Yeah, for
yeah.
the most part, I was mostly Thelemic / Golden Dawn for my time in Calgary and Edmonton. The more what we're going to call ceremonial magic stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting like what you were saying about like being a kid and feeding the goblin type thing. Like that a big part of my magical practice and like just my like healing journey, I guess, has been this sort of like I know it's such a buzzword right now, but like connecting with my inner child.
Yeah,
And like a lot of it has really been like playing pretend.
yeah.
Like a lot of it is really like and like sometimes imagining to the point that I spook myself and I like run back to the car. But like it very much is that sort of like childlike approach to engaging with whatever's around you and like I hesitate to say making things up because I don't think they're made up really, but like I guess being like
These stuffs.
making the space up in your mind for it kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think that imagination or pretend, like, it's tough for Europeans to understand, because when other cultures, and I'm going to speak specifically about some Western African cultures, they have this idea of when they go into dances and things like that they're pretending. They're pretending. Um, but that's not the right way to look at it. Like, there's this dichotomy between pretend and real is something that's very, very European and very Western,
Mhm.
and it's dumb, truly. A lot of times that playing allows for the other stuff to come in and happen, right? Like
Mhm.
that's something that it's tough for the West to try and figure out, because we just look at that and just say they're pretending. They're pretending. but that's not what they're doing. It might look like they're putting on an act, but it's important for not only the person doing it, but for the other things to come in and take part, truly. And that's something that will never be registered within academia. Very few people are talking about it. The only person that's really talking about it in any big way these days is Dr. Jack Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome
Yeah,
dude.
I love him.
But everybody else is just like, they're pretending. It's
Yeah.
an act. It's an act that they're doing. It's like,
Well, it's
you've
funny
got
that
that so wrong.
it's funny that you say like we don't, because like we do get it in the West, but we don't like to call it that. Like that's literally what like all the manifestation coaches are talking about is like they don't say it. They don't say pretend that you have everything that you want, but like that is what you're doing. But like we label it so differently that we don't really make space for actual like pretending like that. And not only that, but like we limit that, you know, those visualizations, like they're so limited within the bounds of existing society. You know, if you're manifesting for money, for love, for a new job, for this, for that. You're not manifesting that you're going to have a spiritual experience in the woods. And like even like the stuff that I see people saying about ayahuasca, like where it is like basically like forcing your brain to pretend, and there's still like it's still so tied within like materialist science.
Yeah.
And it's just it's like they're tippy-toeing into pretending, but not quite fully letting themselves go that far.
Yeah. We I'm not saying that the Western culture ruins everything, but at this point in the
Right?
game, we just like to flatten things out. We like to flatten things out so that we can understand them objectively. It's
Yeah.
once you realize that that's what's happening and you can actually actively see it, you can take yourself out of that, right? Like it's just like, oh, okay, so this is just what we do. But there are bigger messages once we see like that's just that flattening has happened.
Definitely. For sure. All right, we're about an hour and a half now, so we should probably wrap it up. I guess let everybody know where they can find you.
Well, they can head to whatmagicisthis.com, all one word. And that's basically my website. Everything's there. I guarantee if you've never heard my show before, go there, hit the menu, go to the episode list that I have. There's probably something that interests you. Click on that. Listen to the show. I've got tons of show notes. I do so many show notes for every episode that I do. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, I'm on Twitter or X, it's called these days, whatever. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm most active on Twitter, kind of, not so much these days. I'm trying to kind of pull back on the social media stuff, but I've got a Patreon. That's patreon.com/whatmagicisthis. But if you don't know about my podcast already, head to whatmagicisthis.com. Find any of my episodes. I'm on every place you can listen to podcasts, literally every single one of them that I know of. And yeah, I guarantee you I've talked about something that will interest you.
I will second that. Yes, definitely. Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, if I can actually get my mouse to work, that will be the end of this. Thank you so much, Doug. I really appreciate it.
No worries.
Yeah, and then for anybody who wants to find out more about my work, it's pivotholistic.healing.ca, and we will catch you on the next episode.